He has taught me many things. Most of them we won't go into today, like the joy of a good martini. But I want to share with you three things that he's taught me today. The first is the importance of living your life so that you have limited opportunities to be ashamed of yourself. We used to joke about him. He's very proper and he's very fastidious about his appearance, not to the point of being fussy. You know, he doesn't wear a cravat or anything like that. But he is always well turned out. We used to joke that he mowed the grass in a necktie, which is not strictly true, but pretty close. And it wasn't until I was fairly old that I understood or I learned why. The picture on the left was taken in Paris, France, probably in 1944. He went to Europe fairly late in World War II and was, although some of you who know military insignia may know better than I believe this is before, he was offered this commission if he would stay with the occupation forces. And so he was stationed in Paris in General Eisenhower's headquarters for a while. And that's where that picture was taken. But prior to that, he had sailed across, of course, from New York. He had actually been at Rutgers doing intensive language study to get ready. And sailed across and was in England briefly before getting put back on the troop ship to sail to Europe after D-Day. And some of you who have been perhaps of that greatest generation shared this experience on the troop ship. There's not a lot of room. Everybody's sort of jammed in there together. There's not a lot to do except play cards and be sort of indolent. And so he said he got off the troop ship in France and looked at himself in the mirror. And he hadn't shaved and he was unkempt. And he told himself that day, he said, I'll never go a day without shaving again in my life. Because I don't want to look in the mirror and see myself looking this way again. And that's important, right? To be able to look at ourselves in the mirror. Now sometimes, of course, we go too far, and my father also coined the phrase, I've never known anybody named Holoman who didn't have a very high opinion of himself. That's frankly true. Only of people who are naturally born, not necessarily people who inherited it. And he's actually very careful about using the word proud and making sure that he's not prideful. But that's biblical, right? I mean, we're told, love your neighbor like yourself. But not better than yourself. Don't we know so many people who don't like themselves very much? I was watching TV last week and there was a character on a show and she said, it was so sad, she said, nobody can hurt me because they can't say anything bad about myself that I haven't thought about myself, probably in the last half hour. That seems, and of course, believe it or not, that's in a comedy. But we do know people like that, and that's sad. So it's part of who we should be. God made us how? In His own image. And that comes with the obligation, of course, to take care of ourselves and use what we have been given to reflect God's image, but also as something to celebrate. We are made in God's image. That's the first thing I did. By the way, the second picture I should have said, just for completeness, that's him, I think about this time last year, that's him, obviously on the left. Did not discover getting out of view. That's my nephew on the right. He was up his commissioning, and my nephew Michael was commissioned into the Marine Corps. And he's a Marine aviator now in Pensacola, which is a scary thought that he's flying planes around by himself. But anyway, second thing my dad taught me was to be good at what you do, even if it's not what you want to do. My dad is brilliant. He's much smarter than I am. And consistent with the previous statement, I don't say that about very many people. He was a Phi Beta Kappa graduate at the University of North Carolina, an English major. I think in his heart of hearts wanted to be a journalist or a writer. And in fact, while he was in Europe, he wrote dispatches back to the states that were published in a statewide magazine in North Carolina. But when he returned after the war, his father, and he's never said this explicitly, but I think the expectation was clear that he go to work in the family business. My grandfather was a salesman for a company that I think is still in business, Richmond Dry Goods. And as he traveled selling to department stores and so forth, he learned of a one of his customers was a department store in downtown Raleigh, the finest department store in the capital city, been founded in 1899. My grandfather purchased that store during the Great Depression, and his 4 sons were expected to work it with him, and they did. And it was a showplace. I don't know what the analog in Buffalo is. Some of you like that. What's the big fancy downtown department store in the good old days? Finance, A&A's, burgers. This is a place, of course, you go in and with little ladies behind the counter and free delivery and free gift wrapping, hand-tied satin bows, etc., etc. It's a wonderful store. And it was, it was one of the first, if not the very first, store. They saw what was coming in 1957, among the first in the country to completely close their downtown location and move to what was then a suburban shopping center. So they saw the future, and that's the only store I knew, with marble floors in the entranceway and so forth and so on. And my dad was extremely good at it, even though I'm pretty certain that was not his lifelong passion. That was not what he wanted to do. He was a writer. He is a scholar. Up until very recently, I don't think he does this anymore, he participated in a group well into his 80s where they took turns preparing talks, the Sandwich Club. But each member prepared a talk with a little interest and delivered a paper over dinner. And so he continues to exercise his mind. But he was a very good merchant. Each of the 4 sons had their own role. One of them managed the business office, and one of them managed the stock room and the shipping. And his oldest brother, he's the youngest, his oldest brother, of course, was the president. But my dad was the merchandiser, in essence. And he was a great merchant. I'm really glad they got out of the business when they did. I think the modern retailing would have thrown him for a complete loop. In fact, I know it did. He used to say, if you can't sell something at full price during the Christmas season, you shouldn't be in the department store business. And of course, nobody in their right mind today would buy anything from a department store at full price. It's a completely foreign idea. But he was very smart. And my favorite story about this, he used to he didn't have regular meetings with all the employees, but he did the 4 Saturdays of the Christmas season, because then as now, Christmas was the most important. And of course, back in those days, they never put up the Christmas decorations till the day after Thanksgiving. He was always late Wednesday, because they didn't go up before closing on Wednesday, and they had to be ready to go on Friday after Thanksgiving. And he used to call the employees together, and on the last Saturday of the Christmas season, I've heard this speech much, because I went to work for him eventually, and he would say to the little ladies, right, okay, now we're down to the final few days. This is when the men come shopping. He said, they'll come in, they're going to be in a hurry, they're probably going to they may have some alcohol on their breath. So what you do is, no matter what department you're in, whether you're selling tablecloths or table lamps, pull out the very best thing, the most expensive thing you have, put it on the counter and say, this is the finest thing we have. And 90% of the time they'll buy it. He was right. Do the best at what you do, even if it's not what you want to do. That's biblical too, right? God puts us in places that may not be where we thought we would be. But we are also expected to make the most. And sometimes that takes praying to find out how we be the best at where we are. Why did you put me here, God? How can I do the best at what I do? And that leads me to the final point. My dad has taught me how to be a man of faith. He was raised as Baptist, I think converted to Methodism to make sure my mom would stay with him. And they attended the downtown church, Eaton Street Church, and still does. He's in church today, right now. Still goes to church, even though it means riding the van from the retirement community where he lives, and so forth and so on. He and my mom preached Sunday school their entire lives. They preached a college level class for a long time before I was, they stopped before I got to that stage, I guess, so they didn't teach me. And then taught their adult class. My dad took his once a month turn until he was well into his 80s teaching Sunday school. And he also taught me how to use your intellect as you explore your faith. He got fascinated in the 1960s when the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's actually a joke, we won't go there. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the Holy Land. And these earliest documents of the Bible. And so he put together a little, essentially kind of a road show and went around talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls to Rotary clubs and women's clubs and so forth. He's always enjoyed thinking about God and thinking about his faith. And yet, like many of us, those two sides don't always mesh. And so I've heard him say repeatedly, as he sits in the pew of Eaton Street United Methodist Church, he prays along with the man in the gospel, "Oh Lord, I believe, help me in my disbelief." And that's where a lot of us are. In my Sunday school class, our Sunday school class, we just finished reading an amazing book about why God lets bad things happen. And one of the responses that the author encourages us to celebrate is what he calls the theology of protest. That understanding that by saying, God, why did you let this happen, we are embodying our faith. It's a sign of our faith. It's not a crisis of our faith. It's a sign of our faith that we think about, God, why did you let this happen? If we didn't believe in God, we wouldn't be asking, right? So as we grow up, as we mature in the faith, we're always going to be wrestling with these questions. And that was kind of the punchline book. Some of us were reading this book and thinking, I can't wait to get to the end where we find out what the answer is about why God lets bad things happen. And of course, the answer is, we don't know. But in wrestling through that question, it causes us to know God better. It certainly did for me. And even though we don't have clean-cut answers, we understand a little bit deeper into the mystery of God. And I learned that from my dad, I think. How to wrestle with those two things. So my dad's taught me a lot. I was not going to do this until I saw the bulletin, but if you'll indulge me, I want to spend 2 minutes just talking about my mom, because she was a very important part of my dad's life. And I wasn't going to do this until I saw the bulletin. Our last hymn today, "This Is My Father's World," was one of her favorite hymns. We sang it at her funeral 15 years ago. Thursday, Flag Day, she always used to say they put out the flags for my birthday. Thursday was her 90th birthday. She was a woman of great faith too. She was very smart too, even though she went to Duke Dunn, but she was very smart anyway. She was also a woman of great faith. She was the first lay woman to preach a sermon in this big downtown church, the largest church in the North Carolina Conference at that time. So I got many of these same things from her. I just wanted to celebrate her with you too.